These Great Depression foods will be the only ones left. 20 foods to stock now. The widespread prosperity of the 1920s ended abruptly with the stock market crash in October 1929 and the Great Economic Depression that followed. It threatened people's jobs, savings, and even their homes and farms. When this crisis is looked back upon by historians, it is seen to mark one of the major turning points. They discovered that at the height of the downturn in 1933, 24.9% of the total workforce were unemployed, and nearly half the country's banks failed, resulting in homelessness and hunger. History repeats itself, and the best way to avoid past suffering is to learn from our forebears' mistakes. Here are 20 great crash-era recipes we will need soon. 1. Shoe fly pie. This is a classic Amish recipe from Dutch country in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. This recipe comes from a newspaper in the 1930s. It used pretzels as the pie crust with brown sugar and molasses filling. Surprisingly, this meal was ahead of its time, as we still bake pies like this today. The cake in a pie shell made it easier for people to eat it with their hands during that period. The filling includes molasses, brown sugar, and water surfing. Sometimes bakers used pretzels as the pie crust. What's more alluring is the name shoe fly pie was borrowed from a brand of molasses that was popular in the U.S. Back then, the dish came in two different versions, wet bottom and dry bottom. The dry bottom version is baked until fully set and results in a more cake-like consistency. The wet bottom version is set like cake at the top, where it is mixed in with the crumbs, but the very bottom has a creamier consistency. 2. Buttermilk soup. In a 1938 book titled Most for Your Money, it is impressive that buttermilk soup was listed as one of the inexpensive soups Americans could make. In order to cook it, you just need to add raisins or nuts, some nutmeg, sugar, salt, and a lemon peel to a quart of buttermilk. Bring that to a boil and then add rice. Cover with the lid and boil slowly until the rice is soft and mushy. Now your buttermilk soup is ready for the whole family with a rich round flavor and a nice creamy texture. The authors noted that buttermilk should sell for less than half of the price of fresh milk, which makes the above soup one of the cheapest and most nutritious dishes you will ever have. 3. Johnny cakes. Johnny cakes, also known as spider cornbread, were well liked at that time. The base ingredient of this dish, cornmeal, was a kitchen staple that was easily accessible and cost-effective during the 1930s. To bring this ingredient into use, home cooks began making Johnny cakes, a northeastern bread that families used to enjoy, though a bit more decadent than cornbread. Johnny cakes were similar in concept, using cornmeal as their base ingredient. Agreeably, they're a bit richer than the average cornbread too. Some people describe this batter cake as a sort of thin fried cornbread pancake hybrid that was made with buttermilk and any cooking fats available, including bacon grease, lard, or vegetable oil. There's no doubt that they provided some sort of comfort and nutrition during the hard times of depression. 4. Meatless meatloaf. Nowadays, meatloaf is a simple and relatively cheap weeknight dinner. But during that era, not everyone could find or afford this luxury, so they had to be creative. But the question arises, how do you make it without ground beef? It seems absurd to serve the dish without any meat. That's how it became just loaf made out of anything people had. In other words, whatever they had hanging out in the fridge or pantry could be added to it, from liver to raisins, peanuts, carrots, and more. Home cooks would choose a base ingredient and mash it, add some eggs or tomato sauce, pour it into a pan, and cook it in the oven. In some cases, the result was actually similar to a regular beef bun, but it could also be more like a dessert or bread. 5. Garbage mashup. What happens when you combine two different dishes, cuisines, or day parts into a single menu item? Well, food combos were what people ate when they had to combine all the ingredients they had available to make a meal. The garbage mashup is one such example. Browned potatoes, baked beans, and macaroni salad were usually the base of this grub, and Americans would add any meat, sausages, or bacon to it. After that, they'd add onions, chili mustard ketchup, or hot sauce for extra flavor. It was typically served to manual laborers so they could have the energy to complete their long working shifts. What's more delightful is that this would save the public from wastage of food. 6. Chicken feet in broth. This dish is definitely as bizarre as it sounds, but it can actually be very nutritious and rich in collagen, which is good for your bones, provides hydration, and helps to improve your overall health. The chefs would add 2 pounds of chicken feet, some carrots, celery, onions, and other scraped veggies in water, and the mixture was simmered for several hours, while some strain the ingredients and drink the broth. It may seem very unappealing, but it tastes delicious, and many people would eat chicken feet and veggies, both for maximum nutrition. 7. Frozen fruit salad. A frozen fruit salad works wonders. It provides you with a power-packed dose of fiber, vitamins, and antioxidants. It was a very popular dessert in those former times. Whichever canned fruits that were sitting in the pantry with a close expiration date would be used to make this delicious and nourishing food. People used their own techniques for making this meal. Some versions used whipped cream, others just a combination of the preserved fruit, liquid, and milk with a little bit of flour, eggs, and literally any other ingredients they had available like nuts, raisins, or marshmallows. The mix was frozen and served like an ice cream. It was a nice treat for those who had a sweet tooth. 8. Spaghetti with boiled carrots and white sauce. This all-time favorite dish was recommended by First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. It gained huge popularity after the introduction of home economics in schools and colleges during that period. All you needed was to cook some spaghetti until mushy for about 25 minutes and then mix it with boiled mashed carrots. Not only do they add natural sweetness to the tomato sauce, but they also thicken the sauce and give it a nice body. The white sauce was made from milk, flour, margarine, and any spices people wanted to add after mixing. It was then poured into a tray and baked to make a casserole. 9. Poor man's pudding. Another name of this dish is pouting chamois, which is a dessert known as good old-fashioned comfort food. It consisted of a simple cake baked in a hot caramel sauce. As the name suggests, it was popular among unemployed people due to its relatively cheap and readily available ingredients: flour, brown sugar, baking powder, milk, and eggs. In Canada, instead of using brown sugar, Canadians used maple syrup. 10. Squirrel. Eating squirrels was not uncommon in the 30s. Some people only did this when it was roadkill, Others actually hunted squirrels to eat. After all, beef was out of the reach of many struggling households, and chickens were kept alive so they could provide eggs. That's why options were limited. Some prepared it over a fire, but records of the era also showed that Americans cooked squirrel at home with some oil or butter and some onions. Let's just hope the ongoing food crisis doesn't evolve into something as extreme as that condition was. 11. Desperation Pie. These were a Depression-era knockoff of lemon meringue pies. These baked marvels are simply the product of creative bakers who would not allow a shortage of ingredients to prevent them from making something sweet and delicious. Lemons were near impossible to find at stores, so they called this a humble dish made with apple cider vinegar. For Desperation Pie, the recipe also had butter, flour, brown sugar, ground cinnamon, ground nutmeg, egg, salt, and water. In some regions, people called it water pine. 12. Ketchup, mayonnaise, onion, or pickle sandwiches. What do you put on a sandwich when you don't have any meat or cheese to go around? Well, during that era, people would put some ketchup between slices of bread and call it good. They did the same with mayonnaise, and sometimes they had plain onion or pickle for fillings, which sounds way weird. If they were lucky, the hoagie would have a combination of 2 or 3 of these ingredients. 13. Egg drop soup. It is also known as egg flour soup, a healthy Chinese broth-based consommé. For preparation, people used to chop some onions, throw some fried potatoes in a pan, and then add some water. Then the mixture was brought to a boil, and eggs were added and scrambled while it was boiling. Typically, this salty dish was served with toast. Now, you may be wondering why these ingredients were cooked in water instead of being presented individually. We're not entirely sure, but papers from the past suggest it was commonly provided to workers during the winter. Maybe the whole point was to keep workers warm and fill their stomachs with an easy-to-eat meal. 14. Cooked bread. During the downturn, families had to come up with ways to revive foods that had gone past their prime and were no longer fresh. Given that flour prices were soaring back then due to the spike in demand, despite that, home cooks would not let some old hard bread go to waste. Usually they soaked the bread in oil or butter, sometimes water if it needed more hydration, and then they'd put it in the oven for a few minutes, all fried in a pan. Some people would cut the bread into slices, while others preferred to cook the entire piece, then mash it up. 15. Navy bean and ham soup. Some popular beans you can find at grocery stores today are quenelle, baby limas, and great northerns. Navy beans have a mild and slightly nutty flavor, making them versatile for a wide range of dishes. That's why they cook more quickly and get very creamy as they simmer. This soup was made with vegetables, spices, and cooked ham. It was a hearty and tasty meal that was very budget-friendly. 16. Potato candy. This candy is actually an Appalachian specialty treat that traces back to Central Eastern Europe. It uses potato as a starch for the dough, which acts as a sort of marzipan alternative. Despite spud being a staple of the recipe, the final product has little to no vegetable flavor. These candies were incredibly cheap, especially when considering the low cost of peanut butter, which was filled in rolled starch dough at the time. Naturally, potatoes have long been a food for hard times, and the 1930s were no exception. That's why these candies were a beloved snack that could be made with available ingredients and provide a little bit of sweetness in difficult periods. 17. No toppings pizza. Currently, Americans are the biggest consumers of pizza in the world. Every year, more than 3 billion pizzas are sold in the United States, according to data reported by the Washington Post, with sauce, cheese, and delicious toppings to choose from. It's no wonder that number is so high. However, during the hard times, the version of pizza individuals could afford to eat seemed way less appetizing. Resources and ingredients were so limited that the term plain pizza was created. It consisted of pizza dough baked in the oven, covered with just butter or margarine, and no toppings. 18. Rabbit stew and dumplings. Rabbit stew was a way families found of using rabbit meat without wasting any of it, as it has a mild flavor that can be seasoned to taste and used in many dishes, including stews and stir-fries. First, they would bake the rabbit, then they would typically serve the rabbit meat stir-fry, and finally dumplings with rabbit stew would be prepared. Pleasingly, it lasted for however many days it could sit in the fridge. 19. Stuffed artichokes. Just as filled onions, stuffed artichokes were very common, making it as easy as it sounds. You just have to cut off the thorns and the bottom so that it stands upright, and then open up the leaves and stuff the openings with a mix of breadcrumbs, salt, pepper, and garlic. Next, place the veggie in a pot. Fill it halfway with water. Let it boil on high heat. After that, switch to low heat to allow it to simmer. The result is crispy on the outside and soft on the inside. Although eating cooked artichokes is more common, they're just as delicious served raw, especially when they're super fresh. 20. Milk corner. It was a type of ration created by scientists at Cornell University in 1933 when they were looking for inexpensive ways to feed the masses. It was a grill made from dried, powdered milk and cornmeal. It was nutritious and filling. A few years later, the same scientists came up with an idea of using wheat instead of corn. It was served to people who were literally on the brink of starvation, and it actually helped many poor children to survive those hard times. Comment down below on what you think, and leave a like if you find value in the content we do here on this channel. Hit the subscribe button for all the latest updates, and we'll see you in the next video.